Welcome to Stoic Vivu, where we transform ancient wisdom into practical tools for modern life. Our mission is simple: to help you navigate today's chaos using philosophy that has guided humanity for over 2,000 years. Today, we're exploring something profound: the lost art of deep reading and 7 Stoic habits that can transform your scattered mind into a fortress of calm wisdom. We live in an age of endless scrolling, where our attention fractures across dozens of articles, posts, and videos every hour. Our minds feel like browser windows with too many tabs open. We consume information like fast food quickly, mindlessly, without real nourishment. Meanwhile, anxiety rises, wisdom decreases, and we wonder why we feel so empty despite having access to more information than any generation in history. The ancient Stoics faced their own challenges: war, exile, slavery, political turmoil. Yet they discovered something remarkable. Through the practice of deep reading, they built inner citadels of peace that no external chaos could breach. Marcus Aurelius governed an empire while plague ravaged Rome, yet found serenity in his philosophical texts. Seneca faced exile and political persecution, yet his reading practice gave him unshakable calm. Epictetus endured slavery, yet through books, he discovered a freedom no chains could bind. What did they know that we've forgotten? They understood that how you read matters more than how much you read. They knew that the right book, approached with the right mindset, could be medicine for a troubled soul. They practiced reading not as entertainment or distraction, but as a sacred act of self-transformation. In this video, you'll discover 7 specific reading habits drawn directly from Stoic practice. These aren't modern productivity hacks dressed in ancient clothes. These are time-tested practices that Marcus Aurelius used while running an empire, that Seneca employed while advising Nero, that Epictetus taught to students seeking wisdom. You'll learn why making sacred reading time matters more than finding time. You'll discover why reading one great book 10 times surpasses reading 10 books once. You'll understand how to choose books like medicine for your specific life challenges. You'll find mentors in ancient pages who speak directly to your modern struggles. You'll see how a simple journal transforms passive reading into active wisdom. You'll experience reading as morning meditation that sets the tone for your entire day. And crucially, you'll know when to close the books and live your philosophy. These 7 habits aren't just about becoming well-read. They're about becoming well-lived. They're about replacing anxiety with understanding, confusion with clarity, restlessness with purpose. In a world designed to scatter your attention, these practices will teach you to gather it. In a culture that promotes shallow thinking, you'll learn to go deep. The Stoics believed that a single book, properly read, could change a life. Not through information, but through transformation. Not through knowing more, but through becoming more. That's the lost art we're recovering today. Habit number 1. Make sacred reading time. Even emperors did this. The scene is all too familiar. Sarah, a marketing director in Chicago, starts her morning by immediately checking her phone. Emails flood in, Slack notifications ping, and before she's even out of bed, her mind is already scattered across a dozen different problems. By the time she gets to work, she's mentally exhausted, reactive rather than reflective. She tells herself she'll read that philosophy book on her nightstand when she has time, but that time never comes. Days blur into weeks, weeks into months, and that book remains untouched, its wisdom trapped behind a cover that never opens. Marcus Aurelius faced infinitely greater pressures. As Roman emperor, he woke each day to an empire stretching from Britain to Syria, with millions of lives depending on his decisions. Barbarian tribes threatened the borders, plague devastated his cities, and his own generals plotted against him. Yet we know from historical records that Marcus began each day not with crisis management, but with philosophy. Before the sun rose, before the court advisors arrived, before the endless stream of petitions began, he created sacred time for reading. In his personal writings, which we now know as meditations, Marcus refers repeatedly to the teachings he absorbed during these morning sessions. He writes about reading Epictetus, studying philosophy, and examining the thoughts of those who came before. This wasn't leisure reading, this was survival. As he noted, "At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work as a human being. What do I have to complain of if I'm going to do what I was born for, the things I was brought into the world to do?" The key word here is sacred. Not free time, not spare time, not when I get around to it time. Sacred time is inviolable, protected, prioritized above all else. It's the difference between hoping to read and actually reading. It's the difference between wanting wisdom and acquiring it. Consider how Seneca, despite being one of the wealthiest men in Rome and advisor to the Emperor Nero, structured his days. He wrote to his friend Lucilius about his practice. "Every new thing excites the mind, but a mind that seeks truth turns from the new and superficial to the old and profound." He created specific hours for reading philosophy, treating these appointments with the same seriousness as imperial summons. Even Epictetus, who spent his early years as a slave with no control over his own time, found ways to create sacred reading moments. He would rise before his masters, studying by candlelight, transforming stolen moments into an education that would eventually make him one of Rome's greatest teachers. He understood that reading time isn't found, it's made. The modern world conspires against this practice. We're told we should be constantly available, always connected, forever responsive. But the Stoics would see this as a form of slavery more insidious than iron chains. When you don't control your time, you don't control your mind. When you don't control your mind, you don't control your life. Here's the profound truth. Everyone has the same 24 hours, from emperors to slaves, from CEOs to students. The question isn't whether you have time to read, it's whether you've made reading sacred enough to protect that time. Marcus Aurelius could have justified skipping his morning philosophy to deal with urgent imperial business. Seneca could have claimed his political duties left no room for reading. Epictetus could have accepted that slaves don't get to study philosophy. But they didn't. To implement this first habit, you must shift from seeing reading as something that happens in leftover time to something that creates the foundation for everything else. Think of it as tithing, but instead of giving 10% of your money, you're giving the first portion of your day to wisdom. Start with just 20 minutes each morning. Not after you check your email, not after you scroll through news, not after you've handled the urgent tasks. Before. Set your alarm 20 minutes earlier if necessary. Create a reading sanctuary, a specific chair, a certain corner, a designated space that exists solely for this practice. Make it sacred through consistency. The transformation is subtle at first. That frantic feeling upon waking begins to fade. The reactive mindset shifts to a reflective one. You find yourself carrying passages throughout your day, applying ancient wisdom to modern problems. Your colleagues notice you seem calmer, more grounded. Your family finds you more present. You discover what Marcus knew, that morning reading doesn't take time from your day. It multiplies the value of every hour that follows. This is why even emperors did this. Not because they had excess time, but because they understood that without this practice, they would be ruled by circumstances rather than wisdom. They would be reactive rather than responsive. They would live scattered lives rather than centered ones. In our age of infinite distractions, making reading time sacred isn't just helpful, it's revolutionary. It's a declaration that your mind belongs to you, that wisdom matters more than information, that depth trumps speed. It's the first step in recovering the lost art of deep reading. Habit number 2. Read one great book 10 times, not 10 books once. In a sleek Manhattan apartment, David, a financial analyst, proudly displays his library. Hundreds of business books line the shelves, each read once. Their key points highlighted. Their wisdom quickly absorbed and just as quickly forgotten. He reads 50 books a year, racing through them like items on a checklist. Yet when faced with a crisis at work, when his team falls apart and his strategies fail, he finds himself empty-handed. All those books, all that reading, and yet no deep wisdom to guide him through the storm. Seneca would have shaken his head at such waste. The Roman philosopher, despite having access to one of the finest libraries in the empire, advocated for something radically different. In his letters to Lucilius, he writes, "Every new thing excites the mind, but a mind that seeks truth turns from the new and superficial to the old and profound. You must linger among a limited number of master thinkers and digest their works if you would derive ideas which shall win firm hold in your mind. This isn't about limiting yourself, it's about depth over surface, transformation over information." Seneca himself returned to the same texts throughout his life. He read Epictetus so many times he could quote entire passages from memory, despite disagreeing with many of his teachings. He studied the Stoic masters repeatedly, each reading revealing new layers, new applications, new insights. Think about it this way. Would you rather have 10 shallow conversations with strangers or 10 deep conversations with a wise mentor? Books are conversations across time. When you rush through a book once, you're having a surface chat. When you return to it repeatedly, you're building a relationship with the author's mind. Marcus Aurelius demonstrates this perfectly. Throughout meditations, he returns obsessively to the same themes from Epictetus. Not because he had nothing else to read, the imperial library contained thousands of scrolls, but because he understood that wisdom isn't collected like stamps. It's absorbed like sunlight, slowly, repeatedly, until it becomes part of your very being. Consider how this works in practice. The first time you read Epictetus's discourses, you might grasp the basic idea that we control our reactions, not external events. Interesting concept. But the fifth time, you start seeing how this applies to your morning commute. The 10th time, you find yourself naturally implementing it when your boss criticizes your work. The principle hasn't changed, but you have. The book hasn't grown, but your understanding has deepened. This is what the Stoics called digestion, not consumption. Modern readers consume books like competitive eaters, focused on quantity and speed. The Stoics digested books like fine wine connoisseurs, savoring each insight, letting it settle, returning to taste again as their palate developed. Epictetus, despite his years in slavery with limited access to texts, became a master philosopher not by reading everything, but by deeply absorbing what he could access. He studied the same Stoic principles until they became second nature, until he could teach them from the marrow of his bones rather than the surface of his memory. The transformation happens at different levels. First reading, intellectual understanding. You grasp the concepts. Third reading, emotional recognition. You see yourself in the examples. Fifth reading, behavioral shifts. You catch yourself applying the principles. 10th reading, character integration. The wisdom becomes part of who you are, not just what you know. Choose your books like you choose your closest friends, carefully, purposefully, for the long term. What texts deserve such attention? For the Stoics, certain works prove themselves across centuries. Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, an emperor's private thoughts on living with virtue. Seneca's Letters, practical wisdom for navigating life's challenges. Epictetus's Discourses and Handbook, the clearest exposition of Stoic principles ever written. But here's the crucial insight. It's not about which books I or anyone else recommends. It's about finding the texts that speak to your particular struggles, your specific questions, your individual path. Maybe it's a book on Stoic ethics that addresses your workplace dilemmas. Perhaps it's a text on Stoic physics that helps you understand your place in the cosmos. The key is choosing books that you'll want to return to, that reward repeated reading with deeper insights. Modern technology actually helps here. Digital highlights let you track how your understanding evolves. You might highlight one passage on first reading, then realize on the fifth reading that you completely missed the deeper point 3 paragraphs later. Your marginal notes become a conversation between your past and present selves, tracking your growth. The practice transforms how you read everything else, too. Once you experience the depth possible with repeated reading, you become more selective. You stop chasing the latest bestseller and start seeking timeless wisdom. You quit reading for social currency. Oh yes, I've read that. And start reading for a life change. This habit directly creates the calmer, wiser life promised in our title. Calm comes from having reliable wisdom to return to, not frantically seeking new answers. Wisdom comes from depth, not breadth. As Seneca knew, every person who reads 10 books once remains a student. The person who reads one great book 10 times becomes a teacher, first of themselves, then of others. Habit number 3, choose books like medicine for your mind. In a Miami hospital, Dr. Elena Martinez prescribes medications with precise care, analyzing symptoms, considering interactions, measuring dosages. Yet when she gets home, overwhelmed by burnout and compassion fatigue, she reaches randomly for any self-help book that promises quick relief. She reads about morning routines, productivity hacks, and positive thinking, but nothing addresses the deep exhaustion in her soul. She's treating her mind with less care than she treats her patients' bodies. The Stoics understood something we've forgotten. Books are medicine for the mind, and like medicine, they must be chosen with intention and wisdom. Seneca, who suffered from tuberculosis and severe asthma throughout his life, wrote extensively about this parallel. Every new thing excites the mind, he observed. But a mind in distress needs not novelty but remedy. During his exile in Corsica, torn from his home, his fortune, his entire life in Rome, Seneca didn't read for entertainment or distraction. He selected specific philosophical texts that addressed his condition. Works on accepting what we cannot control, on finding freedom within constraints, and on maintaining dignity in adversity. His reading list became his prescription for survival. Marcus Aurelius took this even further. As emperor during the Antonine Plague, watching his citizens die by thousands, burying his own children, he turned to specific passages that addressed grief, loss, and the acceptance of fate. His meditations show him returning repeatedly to Epictetus's teachings on what is up to us and what is not. He wasn't reading broadly, he was medicating specifically. Think about your own mental and emotional challenges. Are you anxious about the future? Angry about injustices? Frustrated with other people? Overwhelmed by responsibilities? Each condition requires different medicine. A person suffering from anxiety doesn't need the same book as someone dealing with grief. Yet we often grab books like we're shopping blindfolded, hoping something will help. Epictetus, who dealt with physical disability from a leg injured during his enslavement, chose his reading to address his specific situation. He focused on texts that distinguished between the body, not under our control, and the mind, completely under our control. His reading prescription helped him transform from a disabled slave into one of Rome's most influential teachers. Here's how the Stoics would diagnose and prescribe. For anxiety about the future, they'd prescribe texts on the discipline of desire, learning to want what happens rather than expecting what we want. Marcus Aurelius, confine yourself to the present. Seneca, the mind that is anxious about future events is miserable. For anger at others, they'd recommend readings on the discipline of action, understanding that we control our own behavior, not others. Epictetus, it's not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about those things. Marcus, how much trouble he avoids who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does. For feelings of inadequacy or imposter syndrome, they'd suggest working on the discipline of assent, choosing how we interpret events. Seneca, every man is in bondage to fear who depends upon chance for happiness. Epictetus, wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants. The key is matching the medicine to the ailment. A person drowning in materialism needs different philosophical treatment than someone paralyzed by perfectionism. This isn't about reading what's popular or what worked for someone else. It's about honest diagnosis followed by targeted treatment. Modern bookstores make this harder, not easier. They organize by genre, not by life challenge. They promote new releases, not timeless remedies. They encourage browsing, not purposeful selection. But you wouldn't treat cancer by browsing the pharmacy. Why treat your mental struggles by randomly selecting books? The Stoics suggest a different approach. First, identify your specific challenge. Not, I want to be happier, but I struggle with comparing myself to others. Not, I need motivation, but I'm paralyzed by fear of failure. Be as specific as a doctor writing a diagnosis. Next, seek texts that directly address this condition. For the Stoics, certain books serve as broad-spectrum antibiotics. Marcus's Meditations for general life wisdom, Seneca's Letters for Practical Daily Challenges, and Epictetus's Handbook for Fundamental Principles. But within these, specific passages target specific ailments. Then, read with the intention to heal, not to be entertained. This means reading slowly, reflectively, ready to pause when something strikes deep. It means being willing to feel uncomfortable as the medicine works. Good philosophy often stings before it heals. It means returning to the same prescription until the condition improves. The transformation can be profound. That Miami doctor, choosing books like medicine, might discover Seneca's letters on maintaining equanimity in demanding professions. She'd find Marcus's reflections on serving others without losing oneself. She'd encounter Epictetus's teachings on controlling what's controllable and releasing the rest. Slowly, the burnout would ease, replaced not by fake positivity but by genuine resilience. This habit explains why the same book affects people differently. A text that transforms one person might leave another cold, not because the book lacks value, but because it's the wrong medicine for their particular condition. The Stoics knew this. They didn't prescribe the same reading for everyone. They matched the cure to the disease. Ultimately, choosing books like medicine means taking your mental health as seriously as your physical health. It means moving from consumption to treatment, from entertainment to transformation. As Seneca wrote from exile, the mind that finds peace in philosophy has found the ultimate medicine, one that heals not just symptoms but the very source of our suffering. Habit number 4. Find a dead mentor in ancient pages. In a Portland coffee shop, Jake, a freelance designer, scrolls through LinkedIn, desperately seeking mentorship. He messages successful designers, attends networking events, and pays for online coaching programs. Yet every living mentor seems too busy, too expensive, or too focused on their own agenda to truly guide him. Meanwhile, on his shelf sits a book of Seneca's letters, unopened, containing 2,000 years of mentorship waiting patiently for him to claim it. The Stoics discovered something remarkable. The best mentors are often dead. Not because they're unavailable, but because they're infinitely available. Marcus Aurelius had the finest living teachers money could buy, yet his deepest education came from Epictetus, a man he never met, whose teachings reached him through books. In Meditations, Marcus converses with his dead mentor as if Epictetus were standing beside him, guiding his decisions, shaping his character. From Epictetus I learned appears throughout Marcus's writings. Think about that, the most powerful man in the world, learning from a former slave who died before they could meet. But through books, Epictetus became more present to Marcus than any living advisor. The emperor could consult his mentor at dawn before court, at night after battle, in moments of crisis when no living sage was available. This isn't metaphorical or mystical, it's intensely practical. When you read deeply enough, the author's voice becomes as clear as if they were speaking directly to you. Seneca becomes your advisor on wealth and ethics. Marcus becomes your guide through leadership and loss. Epictetus becomes your teacher on freedom and dignity. They never cancel appointments, never demand payment, never judge your questions as foolish. Consider how Seneca himself used this practice. Despite being surrounded by Rome's intellectual elite, he found his truest mentors in books. He writes to Lucilius about his daily conversations with Epicurus, Zeno, Chrysippus, all long dead, all vibrantly alive in his study. "I can show you many who lack not a friend, but friendship," he wrote. "This happens when souls, drawn together by mutual desire for goodness, become partners, and such partnership transcends death. The relationship develops like any mentorship, but with unique advantages. Living mentors have bad days, personal agendas, and limited time. Dead mentors offer their best wisdom consistently, without ego, whenever you need them. You can question them at 3 a.m., disagree without offending them, and return to their counsel years later to find new insights. Here's how it works practically. Choose your mentor based on your specific needs. If you struggle with anxiety and overthinking, Epictetus offers clear, direct guidance on controlling what you can control. If you battle with ambition and public life, Seneca provides nuanced wisdom from someone who navigated Rome's treacherous politics. If you seek perspective on leadership and duty, Marcus shares the private thoughts of history's most powerful philosopher. Then engage with them as you would a living mentor. Don't just read their words, dialogue with them. When Epictetus says something challenging, push back. Write your objections in the margins. When Seneca offers advice, test it in your life and report back in your journal. When Marcus shares a struggle, compare it to your own. This isn't passive reading, it's active mentorship. The ancient pages become meeting rooms. Your morning reading becomes a daily consultation. That difficult decision at work? Ask Marcus how he handled imperial pressures. That toxic relationship? Let Epictetus guide you on what's truly under your control. That fear of failure? Seneca faced exile and death. Let him show you perspective. Unlike living mentors who might impose their own vision, dead mentors let you take what serves and leave what doesn't. Seneca was wealthy. If you're not interested in his financial advice, focus on his ethics. Marcus was an emperor. Adapt his leadership insights to your own scale. Epictetus was austere. Take his principles without necessarily adopting his lifestyle. The transformation happens gradually. You start noticing their voices in your head during daily challenges. Facing a difficult conversation, you might hear Epictetus. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Dealing with setbacks, Seneca whispers, every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. Under pressure, Marcus reminds you, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. This is what the Stoics called philosophical friendship, a relationship that transcends time and death. Your mentors become internal advisors, their wisdom integrated into your decision-making process. You're never alone with your struggles because you carry a council of sages in your mind. Modern technology amplifies this ancient practice. E-readers let you highlight and search your mentor's advice instantly. Note-taking apps let you build databases of their wisdom, organized by life challenge. You can carry entire libraries of mentorship in your pocket, consulting your guides wherever you are. But the core practice remains simple. Choose your philosophical parents carefully, engage with them regularly, and let their tested wisdom shape your untested life. As Seneca knew, every great person has not merely one mentor, but an entire ancestry of wisdom supporting them. The paradox is beautiful. By finding mentors in ancient pages, you join a living tradition. You become part of an unbroken chain stretching from ancient Rome to your morning coffee, from marble halls to modern struggles. The dead mentors make you part of something larger, older, and wiser than yourself. Habit number 5. Read with a journal, the philosopher's secret. In her Boston study, Professor Rebecca Chun reads philosophy voraciously. She flies through texts, her mind sparking with insights, making brilliant connections. Yet by the next morning, those revelations have vanished like dreams upon waking. She remembers reading something profound about courage in Seneca, but can't recall the specific insight. She knows Epictetus changed her perspective on control, but the exact shift eludes her. All that wisdom, flowing through her mind like water through a sieve, leaving only the vague sense that she once understood something important. Marcus Aurelius would have recognized this problem immediately. The most powerful man in the world kept a journal not for posterity, not for publication, but for the urgent work of transforming reading into wisdom. What we call meditations was never meant to be a book. It was Marcus's reading journal, his philosophical workbook, his tool for capturing and crystallizing the insights that would otherwise evaporate. Open Meditations to any page, and you'll find Marcus in dialogue with his reading. From Epictetus, the recognition that, as Antoninus said, remember what Plato wrote about. This isn't name-dropping, it's active processing. Marcus read with stylus in hand, ready to capture not just what the philosophers said, but what their words meant for his specific life, his particular challenges. The Stoics understood what neuroscience now confirms. Writing by hand creates neural pathways that typing cannot replicate. The physical act of writing slows down your thoughts, forces you to process, and makes you choose what matters. When you read without writing, you're a passive consumer. When you read with a journal, you become a philosophical participant. Seneca's letters reveal the same practice. Writing to Lucilius, he doesn't just share quotes, he shows his work. I've been reading Epictetus today. He begins, then demonstrates how he's wrestling with the ideas, adapting them, making them Stoic. His letters are essentially his reading journal shared with a friend. Through writing, he transforms from reader to thinker. But here's the philosopher's secret. It's not about beautiful prose or profound insights. It's about honest engagement. Your journal isn't for anyone else's eyes. It's your workshop, your laboratory, your private dialogue with wisdom. Messy is fine. Confusion is normal. Half-formed thoughts are perfect. The magic isn't in the writing, it's in the thinking that writing demands. The practice is deceptively simple. As you read, keep your journal open beside you. When something strikes you, a phrase, an idea, a question, pause. Don't just underline it in the book. Write it out in your own hand. But don't stop there. That's just transcription. The real work begins with one powerful word. Because this matters to me, because I struggle with this, because this changes my thinking, because that single word forces you to move from passive appreciation to active integration. It bridges the gap between ancient wisdom and your modern life. It transforms universal principles into personal medicine. Watch how this works. You read Epictetus. Men are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of them. Without a journal, you might think, how true, and move on. With a journal, you write, this matters because I've been disturbed all week about my performance review. The review itself is neutral. It's my interpretation that's causing suffering. What if I viewed criticism as information rather than judgment? Now you're not just reading philosophy, you're doing philosophy. The journal becomes your gymnasium for wisdom, where you work out new perspectives, test different interpretations, and build mental muscles. Each entry is a rep, strengthening your ability to think stoically. The benefits compound dramatically. Return to your journal after a month, and you'll see your own evolution. That insight about criticism, you'll find 3 more entries exploring it from different angles, tracking how you've applied it, noting where you've succeeded and failed. Your journal becomes a map of your philosophical journey, showing not just where you've been but how far you've traveled. Epictetus himself, teaching in his school, required students to keep such journals. He knew that wisdom isn't transferred like data from hard drive to hard drive. It must be cultivated like a garden, with each student working their own soil. The journal is your spade, turning over ideas, planting insights, watering them with reflection until they bloom into wisdom. Modern journaling often focuses on feelings and experiences. The Stoic reading journal focuses on ideas and applications. You're not writing, "Dear Diary, today I felt." You're writing, "Marcus argues that," which means I should. Tomorrow I'll test this by. It's less confession, more experiment. Less emotion, more examination. The practice reveals patterns you'd never notice otherwise. You might discover you return repeatedly to passages about anger, signaling where you need work. You might find your interpretations of the same passage changing as you grow, showing your philosophical evolution. Your journal becomes a mirror, reflecting not just what you've read but who you're becoming. Some worry about doing it right, but Marcus's Meditations shows there's no perfect method. Sometimes he writes lengthy philosophical arguments. Other times, just a quoted phrase that struck him. Sometimes he challenges the philosophers, other times he simply agrees. The only wrong way to keep a reading journal is not to keep one at all. The transformation is gradual but profound. That Boston professor, journal in hand, no longer loses insights like morning mist. Her marginalia becomes a conversation across centuries. Her journal entries track not just what she's read but who she's becoming. She finds herself returning to her own notes as much as to the original texts, building a personal wisdom literature from her engagement with the masters. This is how reading becomes more than consumption, it becomes creation. You're not just taking in the Stoics' thoughts, you're generating your own. You're not just learning philosophy, you're becoming a philosopher. As Marcus knew, the journal transforms reading from passive entertainment into active transformation. The secret isn't complicated. It's simply this. Read with pen in hand and honesty in heart. Habit number 6. Turn reading into morning meditation. At 5:30 a.m. in Denver, Michelle, a pediatric nurse, jolts awake to her alarm. Within seconds, her mind floods with the day's anxieties, difficult patients, staffing shortages, that confrontation with a colleague she's been dreading. She reaches for her phone, scrolling through news that only amplifies her stress. By the time she arrives at the hospital, she's already emotionally depleted, her inner resources drained before the first patient even arrives. Marcus Aurelius faced similar morning floods of responsibility. He woke each day knowing that plague victims needed comfort, frontier armies needed orders, and corrupt senators needed managing. Yet he discovered a practice that transformed his mornings from anxiety to clarity. Contemplative reading that functioned as meditation. Not meditation as we often imagine it, sitting in silence, trying to empty the mind, but meditation as the Stoics practiced it, focused reflection on philosophical principles. In Book 2 of Meditations, Marcus writes, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly." This wasn't pessimism, it was morning philosophical preparation. He used reading and reflection to armor his mind before the day's battles began. The practice differs radically from both rushed morning reading and traditional meditation. You're not trying to cram information before work. You're not trying to achieve emptiness. You're using carefully chosen texts as objects of contemplation, allowing ancient wisdom to settle into your consciousness like morning dew on leaves. Seneca describes his version in Letter 83. "The day has already begun to lessen. It has shrunk considerably, but yet will still allow a goodly space. Let us, with our minds set, wake up." He would select a single passage from his reading, perhaps a line from Epictetus or Zeno, and carry it through his morning routine like a mantra, examining it from different angles, applying it to the day ahead. Here's how to implement this transformative practice. First, select your morning text the night before. This isn't random browsing. It's intentional selection based on what you'll face tomorrow. Difficult meeting? Choose a passage on maintaining composure. Overwhelming deadlines? Select text on focusing on what's controllable. The selection itself becomes part of the meditation. Wake 15 minutes earlier than usual, not hours, just minutes. Before checking phones, before reviewing schedules, before letting the world rush in, reach for your chosen text. Read slowly, perhaps aloud. The Stoics believed in the power of spoken philosophy, letting the words resonate physically as well as mentally. Then close the book. This is crucial. Morning meditation reading isn't about quantity. It's about depth. Take one idea, maybe even one sentence, and sit with it. Turn it over in your mind like a craftsman examining a gem, seeing how light strikes different facets. Epictetus taught his students to use what he called morning reflections, taking a philosophical principle and testing it against the day ahead. Today I will meet with interference. Ingratitude, insolence, becomes not just an observation but a preparation. You're pre-living your day through philosophical eyes, preparing responses before reactions are needed. The transformation happens at multiple levels. Physiologically, you're activating your prefrontal cortex, the seat of rational thought, before your amygdala starts firing with daily stresses. Psychologically, you're establishing an internal locus of control before external forces try to take over. Philosophically, you're choosing your mental framework before circumstances choose it for you. Consider how different traditions have recognized this power. Christian monks practiced lectio divina, divine reading as meditation. Buddhist practitioners use scripture as contemplation objects. But the Stoics were perhaps most practical, using morning reading not for mystical union but for daily resilience. The practice adapts to your life. A parent might contemplate Marcus on patience while making breakfast. A CEO might reflect on Seneca's views on leadership during their commute. A student might carry Epictetus's on effort versus outcome to their exam. The text becomes a lens through which you view your entire day. Modern research on neuroplasticity confirms what the Stoics intuited. Morning mental states set neural patterns for hours afterward. Starting with philosophical contemplation literally rewires your brain for wisdom rather than reactivity. You're not just reading about Stoicism, you're installing it as your operating system. The key is consistency over intensity. Better to spend 5 minutes every morning with a single paragraph than an hour once a week with entire chapters. The goal isn't to become a scholar, but to become wise. Not to know about philosophy, but to live philosophically. That Denver nurse, implementing this practice, might start her day with Epictetus. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Reading it slowly, she contemplates specific scenarios. The chronic complainer in room 302, the overwhelmed resident, the broken equipment. By the time she enters the hospital, she's not depleted but prepared. The day's challenges meet a mind already fortified with wisdom. As Marcus discovered, this practice transforms reading from information consumption into wisdom cultivation. Your morning book becomes your mental temple, your daily text your philosophical armor. You enter each day not as a reactive victim of circumstances, but as a prepared practitioner of wisdom. This is why the Stoics valued morning reading above all other times. Not because mornings are magical, but because mornings are malleable. In those quiet moments before the world imposes its agenda, you can choose your mental framework. You can decide whether to face the day with scattered anxiety or centered wisdom. The book in your hands becomes the rudder for your entire day. Habit number 7. Close books to open your life. In his Seattle apartment, surrounded by philosophy books stacked like fortress walls, Thomas has become a Stoic scholar. He can quote Marcus Aurelius at length, debate Seneca's finer points, and explain Epictetus's categories with professor-like precision. Yet when his girlfriend leaves him, when his startup fails, when his father falls ill, all those memorized passages offer no real comfort. He knows about Stoicism but hasn't learned to live it. He's collected wisdom like stamps, displaying them proudly but never putting them to use. Marcus Aurelius warns against this exact trap. Throughout meditations, he repeatedly tells himself, "No more wandering. You are dying. Throw away your books. Stop letting yourself be distracted." This from a man who loved reading, who valued philosophy above all else. Yet he understood a truth we often forget. Books are meant to be ladders, not cages. They should lift us to action, not trap us in contemplation. The emperor's own life exemplifies this balance. He read philosophy at dawn, then spent his day applying it, judging legal cases with Stoic justice, leading armies with Stoic courage, facing personal tragedies with Stoic acceptance. His philosophical education wasn't separate from his lived experience. It was preparation for it. Seneca articulated this principle with characteristic directness. Every new thing excites the mind, but a mind that seeks truth turns from the new and superficial to test wisdom in the laboratory of life. Despite his vast library and scholarly reputation, Seneca served as advisor to Nero, managed enormous wealth, faced exile, and ultimately death, all while practicing what he preached. The danger of perpetual reading is subtle but real. Books become an escape from life rather than preparation for it. We read about courage instead of acting courageously. We study wisdom instead of making wise choices. We collect philosophical insights like trophies while our actual lives remain unchanged. Epictetus, the slave-turned-teacher, understood this viscerally. His teachings emphasize practice over theory with almost militant intensity. "Don't explain your philosophy," he commanded his students. "Embody it." He knew that a slave who understands freedom intellectually but doesn't claim it internally remains enslaved. A student who memorizes principles but doesn't practice them has learned nothing. Here's the radical truth. At some point, more reading becomes procrastination. You don't need to read another book on courage. You need to have that difficult conversation. You don't need another text on wisdom. You need to make that hard decision. You don't need to study acceptance. You need to accept what's already happened. The Stoics suggest a rhythm: read to prepare, then close the book to practice. Think of it like athletic training. You study technique, but eventually you must enter the arena. You review strategy, but ultimately you must play the game. Reading without application is like training for a race you never run. This doesn't mean abandoning books. It means using them properly. When facing a specific challenge, read relevant passages for guidance. When encountering a new situation, consult your philosophical advisors. But then, and this is crucial, close the book and engage with life. Test the principles. Apply the wisdom. Learn from results, not just texts. Marcus provides the perfect model. Before a military campaign, he might read about courage and strategy. During the campaign, books stayed closed while he led. After victories or defeats, he'd return to philosophy to process experiences. The cycle continues: preparation, action, reflection. Consider how this transforms your relationship with reading. Instead of asking, "What should I read next?" ask, "What have I read that I haven't yet lived?" Instead of pride in how many philosophy books you own, take pride in how many principles you've tested. Instead of impressing others with quotes, impress yourself with applications. The practice requires honest self-assessment. Where are you hiding in books? What actions are you avoiding through endless study? Which principles have you understood intellectually but not embodied practically? These questions sting because they reveal the gap between knowing and being. Real Stoic reading creates an urgency for living. When you truly understand that life is brief, that character is built through action, that wisdom untested is wisdom wasted, books become launching pads rather than landing places. You read not to become a better reader, but to become a better person. That Seattle scholar, recognizing his imbalance, might close his books and open his life. Instead of reading about resilience, he processes his breakup using Stoic principles. Rather than studying leadership, he rebuilds his startup with philosophical foundations. In place of memorizing passages on family duty, he shows up for his father with presence and strength. The transformation is profound. Philosophy moves from your bookshelf to your bloodstream. Principles shift from abstract to active. You stop being someone who has read the Stoics and start being someone who lives stoically. Your life becomes your real philosophical text. Each day a new page you're writing. Ultimately, this seventh habit completes the circle. You make time to read, habit 1, so you can live better. You read deeply, habit 2, so applications run deep. You choose books as medicine, habit 3, to heal real wounds. You find mentors, habit 4, to guide actual journeys. You journal, habit 5, to track genuine progress. You meditate on texts, habit 6, to face real days. And finally, you close books, habit 7, to open your life to wisdom's full expression. As Marcus knew, standing at the intersection of philosophy and power, the goal was never to become a great reader. The goal was to become greatly human. Books are the map, but life is the territory. At some point, you must fold the map, step onto the path, and walk. Your 7 habits for a calmer, wiser life. 7 habits. 7 ancient practices recovered for modern minds. 7 ways to transform scattered anxiety into centered wisdom. You've just discovered what Marcus Aurelius knew in his tent on the Danube frontier, what Seneca understood in exile, what Epictetus taught to students seeking freedom. The lost art of deep reading isn't lost, it's waiting. Let's crystallize these practices into your daily reality. First, you'll make reading sacred, creating inviolable time each morning before the world's chaos begins. Second, you'll choose depth over breadth, reading one great book 10 times rather than 10 books once. Third, you'll select books like medicine, matching philosophical remedies to your specific life challenges. Fourth, you'll find mentors in ancient pages, building relationships with wise guides who never disappoint or disappear. Fifth, you'll read with a journal in hand, transforming passive consumption into active wisdom. Sixth, you'll begin each day with contemplative reading, using texts as morning meditation to center your mind. And seventh, you'll know when to close books and live your philosophy, ensuring wisdom moves from page to practice. These aren't just reading techniques, they're life transformation tools. That scattered feeling plaguing your days? It fades when you start mornings with Marcus instead of social media. That sense of being overwhelmed? It calms when you realize Seneca faced the same challenges and left you solutions. That imposter syndrome? It dissolves when Epictetus shows you what truly lies within your control. The promise of a calmer, wiser life isn't marketing. It's the documented experience of countless practitioners across centuries. From Roman emperors to modern CEOs, from ancient slaves to contemporary teachers, those who embrace these habits report the same transformation. Anxiety replaced by understanding, confusion by clarity, reactivity by response. But here's the crucial truth. Reading about these habits changes nothing. You must choose. Will you remain a consumer of wisdom or become a practitioner? Will you collect more information or cultivate transformation? Will you read about the calm, wise life or will you live it? Start tomorrow. Choose one habit, perhaps sacred morning time or reading with a journal. Practice it for 7 days. Feel the shift. Then add another. Within weeks, you'll understand why the Stoics treasured these practices. Within months, others will notice your transformation. Within a year, you'll wonder how you ever lived differently. The Stoics believed philosophy wasn't an academic exercise, but an art of living. These 7 habits are your tools for practicing that art. They're your bridge from knowing about wisdom to being wise, from reading about calm to living calmly. If this resonated with you, if you're ready to recover the lost art of deep reading, subscribe to Stoic Vivu. Like this video to help others discover these transformative practices. Comment below with which habit you'll start tomorrow. Let's support each other on this journey. Share this with someone who needs more calm and wisdom in their life. Remember, as Seneca wrote, every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. Today, shallow reading ends. Tomorrow, deep wisdom begins.